Welcome back to the Practical Spirituality Podcast. We are so excited to have you on this journey with us, where we explore all elements of mind, body, emotions, and soul through the lens of everyday life. We love recording this show and are very appreciative of all the positive feedback we've been getting and the thousands of listeners who are tuning in every week. The show does take a lot of time and effort and investment from us. We would love to keep this going, and we need your help to do it. Please support the show by joining our community at Patreon. Our Patreon community get ongoing access to new and exclusive episodes, even after the completion of this initial season. You can find the link in our podcast bio in the description of each episode, or you can go to www.patreon.com/Practical Spirituality Podcast. On this week's episode, we're discussing what is divine purpose, or also known as divine design. I do have a question that I do want to ask you about. And I don't know if we covered this when you were here in Australia, but the question was, what about choice? I really want to know the answer to that. So what about choice? If it's all pre-laid out, what about choice?
What about choice also comes into partly about free will. Like they're kind of
they
go hand in hand. It's just different wording.
Right. Free will, choice. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
I think what's always really just interesting about spirituality in general, it's just such an open topic all of the time. And I think from us exploring spirituality, I've only ever really known new understandings of spirituality to be quite triggering, to bring up emotion. Mm-hmm. The information is being channeled from anyone. It has to be something that either feels really right for you, but it can feel right for you and also still trigger you. So when it comes to something like free will or choice, to me, it does depend on where your understanding is, but you can go so deep into these things as we both have experienced, because even though before we've come here and in this theory, we've planned every single detail out, then you've already signed off on all the choices you're going to make. So any choice that you're making right now in this present moment in your life is one you already signed off on. So every choice you make is going to be the correct one for you. So you technically do have free will in a way being here, but it's already been organized by you for you.
Mm-hmm. So, but why would we do that? Why would we pre-decide every single choice? Is there not any part of it that's left open to go, oh, well, wait a minute. And for those that do believe they have choice, mm-hmm. How does that play out in what we were talking about when it comes to divine purpose, that they do have choice?
Because I'm also intrigued, I guess, to hear your perspective on it, because it always comes back down to people's belief systems and how they continue to evolve and change as well.
So my belief system was, I clearly believed I had choice because I would wrap myself inside out with worry and anxiety about making any kind of choice. So I think for a long time, especially after the first time I heard about divine purpose, I thought that there was a blueprint, mm-hmm. and that there was wiggle room in the blueprint that I needed to be able to, depending on where I was at and what awarenesses I had, the different choices I could make.
But even in just continuing to talk this out, because I think we'll find that in these conversations, you can go so deep into them, and depending on who you're talking to, it evolves and changes so quickly, and is a unique understanding to that person, as we kind of covered last time or when we last spoke. But that's also kind of the beauty in it, because I don't feel, and again, I'm curious about you as well, I don't feel defensive of any spiritual understanding or protective of any of them, because to me, they're all correct and they're all there for a reason, and the beliefs around them are there for a reason. But what I always have found fascinating, most people who I've met, and I'm generalizing it here, most people that I've met who struggle with the idea that it's all planned out for us, by us, have a tricky relationship with their emotions.
Oh.
Whereas the individuals who have spent whatever period of time investing in their emotions and are emotionally fluid and very comfortable with their emotions are able to go, that's interesting, and talk about every single example that's went through their lives and get to their own conclusion, whatever that might be.
I see. And that makes sense to me. So, but the more intriguing thing that you just said was all of the different beliefs that are out there and all the different spiritual paths that people take are all correct for those people at that time. Expand a bit more on that. So for example, someone who really believes that it's about our choices, that's perfect for them.
I think understanding spirituality is also understanding that it's their journey to have those particular beliefs, and that it's no one's job to convince them otherwise or to change how someone else is going to go through this life or this world. And if someone is curious to question it, that's always an enjoyable, in my experience, conversation to be a part of. But if someone doesn't want to have the conversation either, it's about respecting that boundary as well. I feel if you go through spirituality, both the many different versions of spirituality, or even the sense of spirituality through religion, you'll see that there's been a history of everyone telling each other that their version's right and the other person's is wrong.
Exactly. Yes.
I remember years ago, 6 or 8 years ago at this point, just thinking randomly, it's probably in a meditation, of who is anyone to say anyone's spiritual journey is right or wrong for the one they're currently on.
I see that point. Yeah.
The goal, I know for me, even exploring spirituality way back, was to actually the curiosity of it. So it's not about what's right and wrong. It's about actually us coming together and talking about these things openly and creating a level of curiosity in another person. Whatever emotions that comes along with that should actually feed that curiosity of, why did that trigger me, or what's going on within me that when I heard that I was triggered.
I think that's a good point to make. And I think that's a good place for us to be, exploring that and letting people know that, because a lot of people might think that, we're here to tell them exactly how. And I don't know about you, but it's been unfolding my entire life. And so, like I've said that before, what I believed when I was, a small child, to what I believed in my teens, to what I believed in my 20s, to my 30s, it changes so much. It is an unfolding for all of us. And however that pans out, it's still what we want to explore. We want to explore what part of it we can help people get more curious about.
But I feel from a very early age and exposure to what was a very different understanding of spirituality when I was younger versus the one I have now, it's understandable how every version, how it has evolved, still has the capability of triggering me, my family, my friends, clients. And I think the enjoyment of spirituality is actually when you take the attitude of that curiosity into it, much of a freeing place it can become mentally, emotionally, and physically when there's that curiosity and fluidity to go with it.
So you say that, and someone like myself who's been through such a tumultuous journey, and also a tumultuous journey with my emotions, I agree with you that the curiosity is great, but you also, the fear comes up around the emotions part. And you go, well, if you're someone who's been trying to control or run away from your emotions your entire life, and that curiosity brings you closer to those emotions, you're not going to want to go there. There's a natural propensity to go, run in the other direction.
Yeah. But an interesting word you use there, which I know we'll talk about a lot more, control.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And I know we've had these conversations of how much we have been taught to, or continue to, or choose to, or we're meant to control our thoughts, our emotions, our decisions. The list goes on. A huge part of it, which is huge in the spirituality community, self-help, is trying to learn acceptance in a lot of regards of many different things in life, of how things unfolded. And we both know that that's not necessarily an easy journey either. It's not been an easy one for anyone I've met, nor for myself.
I mean, for many years, acceptance was my kryptonite. It was like, if I heard that word acceptance, I wanted to shoot somebody.
Yeah. But for us to be able to accept anything in regards to mind, body, emotions, soul, past experiences, it takes layers and layers of understanding and curiosity and exploration and being triggered and getting exposure to many different things that is inevitably going to make us uncomfortable. And it takes a long time I know it took me a long time.
I think from my background of coming from that place where, control your emotions, control your emotions, control your emotions, to then getting to a point where everybody was saying you have to come to a place of acceptance. I was like, how do you do that? And nobody ever seemed to know how to do that. It's like, okay. And like so many people that I've worked with over the years, when you've been trying to control the emotional part of it for so long, or control all of it, whatever it is, the idea of letting go of that seems like it's too big.
Yeah. But this is why it's the journey of actually beginning to chip away at that. And I know we've had these conversations before, and it's brought up frustrations in both of us. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but how out in the industry, spirituality, self-help, any industry that is there to cater to help someone through their journey, when I see ads or promotions that basically that they can assist you to get through all of this in 1 week or 1 month, or to get to a place of self-acceptance overnight, that's never been my experience in the many years of exploration, because as far as I'm aware, it's something that's meant to be done over many years naturally. It can't be rushed.
Well, naturally. And yes, we have had this conversation. And yes, there are lots of people out there saying it. I feel like it makes my job harder, because I inevitably am asked, how many sessions do you think it will take? And I want to say, how long is a piece of string? We have no idea. But that doesn't help people when they feel like they're desperate for that answer either.
But I think this is where there is I know definitely there was for me a lack of education of actually understanding what the end result was, or what was I actually looking for.
And I think I mentioned that to you before. People have often come in and they're looking for the answer instead of understanding that we are on a journey and the journey has to unfold.
Yep. I feel when it comes to, I just want to bring it back to the conversation about control a little bit, because I do feel there's a lot to say around that, which we'll definitely not all cover in one conversation. I remember saying to clients before, there is no love in control. So the more you can try to control something, there's, of course, a lack of love present, but there's also no freedom in continuing to control your thoughts, your emotions, your body. It's not something where freedom has ever existed. So even though it's actually about educating a person and them understanding that what's logically going to be required from them in some ways, even before at times you even go near the emotions themselves, because if you and I both know when those emotions come up, they can be strong, and that can bring up the fear, and then it goes back to that programming logically of, this is why I don't do this.
Oh, I can attest to that.
As we talked about a little bit earlier, when you're on the journey that you and I have been on, our experience has always been, it's a long one.
Yeah, yes, it is a long one. I think the best way it was said to me is when I first started, I don't want to say first, it's probably midway through my journey, but probably coming more to the understanding that there is no quick fix. I used to say to the woman that was my teacher at the time, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm going to get there, And she would just sit and smile and say, where are you getting to? And it used to drive me mad. Well, to that place of peace. Oh, I thought you were peaceful right now. This made me want to hit her because I wanted that. Sure, when I sat with her, I was peaceful because you could not be peaceful when you were with her. That's just kind of the energy she exuded at the time. But I wanted to take that peacefulness that I felt when I would sit with her and talk with her back out into the world, into my life, because I would leave that space and I would go back out and I'd be riddled with the fear and the need to control and the need to figure it all out and the need to, which I see that happening with people that I talk with a lot. It is a long journey, Gareth. What I'm trying to get back to is it is coming back to the curiosity instead of thinking there is a destination that I have to arrive at.
Yeah. I agree. And I feel it's about, say, as an industry, how do we actually begin to provide people with realistic expectations of actually what the journey entails at times? And how kind of, as you mentioned in the previous episode, of it brought you kicking and screaming at times and not honesty. And it's so true. But yet it's so healing.
So I think one of the things that I like to talk to people about is, I used to say in the early days, I was promised happy, joyous, and free. And I'm not leaving till I get my happy, joyous, and free. And as the time evolved, I was like, okay, so happy, joyous, and free is not something that's going to be 24/7. And I'm starting to understand that. So then my war cry changed to, I just want to be comfortable in my own skin. If I can be comfortable in my own skin, then I'll be able to continue along this journey. Well, that's about the time that, lovely kryptonite called acceptance showed up, which I definitely went kicking and screaming. Why should I have to accept this? Anyway, as you can well attest, I can still do that sometimes. But that showed up in the journey. And for me, the curiosity became, well, all right, so if I can change the intention back to looking at me and becoming more comfortable instead of living in that need to control or fear-based or frightened of what's going to show up next, when I can get back to that, coming back to being more comfortable regardless of what shows up, then I'm not as scared of the journey as I had been for the first half of my life. And so I think I often bring that in early on when I'm helping others. Instead of, we're going to be healed of all of this or whatever. How about we get to a point where we're comfortable becoming curious about what's unfolding?
What I try to relay to people is that this is your journey. This is your journey that you're on. And I'm maybe only a small stepping stone in that journey of the many people that you'll have conversations with, talk to, explore, receive new understandings. But it's a journey nonetheless. Trigger warning. But we both remember ourselves personally, never mind with the people we've worked with, of when we're so in our emotion that we would come in and I deserve a happy life and I deserve this and I deserve to be happy and free and I don't deserve to be sad. I don't deserve to be depressed. I don't deserve. What you deserve is actually to understand what you've already come through. Logically, emotionally, physically. It's those answers that you're actually craving. But again, when have we ever been taught that?
We haven't. And it's true. Those are the answers that would help us come to that place of being comfortable with the journey. But it's never even spoken of, understanding the experiences that we have had and what we are having.
You deserve to be understood by yourself. We've never been taught to really ever ask the question why in so many different areas of our lives. Because normally when we start asking questions, it triggers us and most likely triggers other people too. And we live in a world where we're desperate for other people's approval to have any sort of self-value for ourselves.
Right. But even hearing you say that, you see, so I would say I don't train people to ask the why question. And I'll tell you why. Because in the way that I look at it, when it comes to the mind, and because I work with so many people that have been through so much trauma, When you ask the why question, then the mind goes back and pulls up. And I know you're going to laugh and say, that's exactly what I want to have happen, but that's, you got to hear me out. Okay.
Yep.
It's going to pull up every single experience or every single proof in my book as to where all of these emotions are being held.
Yep.
To the person that hasn't had the ability to feel comfortable in that just makes them want to slam the door even more, or makes them more afraid and go into survival mode even more. So one of the things that when I'm working with someone, I go, yep, let's get curious, but let's be careful about the questions that we're asking. So what is it about that instead of the why? Because and I'm speaking from my experience, Gareth, because my experience is when I used to ask why, like if we were to take the last time I got triggered, if I were to say, why do I always get triggered by this? There's not enough time in, 2 or 3 days to carry out all the whys to me being triggered in that particular, and the mind would bring every single one of them up. So instead of that is, okay, so what's happening in this moment with the emotion that you don't understand? And what does this emotion mean to you? Of course, if you asked me that, I'd probably go, it's uncomfortable and I don't want to feel it.
The joys of being human.
Right.
But this is where it's, because I do agree with everything you said, Kim, because obviously when you or I are working with clients, it's a very different approach depending on why they're coming to you, either of us, so you're always going to be sensitive to how you approach topics, even coming back to the journey and why we're here and why these positive or negative experiences to exist. It comes back down to those spiritual questions, because even when a person is able to get to a place of having a good relationship with their mind, or having a good relationship with their emotions and a good relationship with their body, we both know that, of course, the journey still continues, and there's still those deep-rooted questions that appear of wanting to understand, okay, the memories from past experiences, both negative and positive, may not trigger me anymore to the same extent they once did. But that doesn't necessarily mean I understand why it happened.
Well, and depending on how, I agree with that, depending on how you've explored those experiences. But so that comes back to beg the question of, do we really need to understand the why they happened if it's already been planned out?
The journey here is actually in being able to understand why you would have chosen some experiences to even exist. And we can't, of course, remember every single experience we've been through. And there'll always be key particular ones, both positive and negative, that stick out from our past. And if they continue to resurface over many decades, then there's a reason why they're continuing to surface, because there's an understanding or meaning behind it that we yet haven't been able to process or harvest from that memory yet. And that's why they keep occurring, even with a person who has done the journey and has a great relationship with it. If it continues to appear, we both know you just simply can't go through life ignoring it.
Correct.
So there is a difference in the different areas we're talking about here, in the sense of going to therapy and getting the support. And then there's also going and getting the spiritual curiosity as well. And, some people do the therapy, it works really well for them, and then they never have that spiritual curiosity or the need or want to ask more questions, which is 100%. But then there are people who do the journey but still want to know, okay, I still have a curiosity to the meaning behind it.
I think lots of people have the curiosity. And I think for most people it's there, but they don't know how to ask those questions or where to find the answers, because there's a lot of information out there, but how much of the information out there really answers those questions?
I feel, in my experience, there's been very few practitioners actually willing to ask particular questions to a client at times that will actually allow them to possibly go there and start receiving those answers. Because when you go to that place, to receive those answers, it can be in a very emotional one, as you and I both know. And there is that culture or that presence in society of don't go digging up the past, don't go questioning it. And then if you do find something, it's like, okay, let's not talk about it. So it's really layered. And the more that you actually want to understand something, the more emotion that's inevitably going to come up during that process. And therefore, it's advisable that if you're going to go deeply searching for those answers of why these things occur to you in your lifetime, let them be positive or negative, having a really good understanding of mind and emotions and understanding the purpose of why they're a part of our human existence is a huge part of actually being able to do the journey to get those answers that you have the curiosity or craving to receive.
I understand that. And why is it you think that we as a society and we as a people are so afraid of our emotions and having that understanding?
Well, we've always been able to, we all have really good relationships, of course, with our positive emotions. There's no doubt about that, because we're praised to express them, to talk about them, to share them with other people, to put them on Facebook, Instagram, to share all these happy memories. But when it comes to the more negative experiences, we have a really poor relationship with them. And it does come down to a lot of different reasons. Often when we express our negative emotions, we're quite aware of how uncomfortable it makes us feel internally because we don't know how to regulate those emotions, or we don't even logically understand them. But we're also hyper aware of how it makes other people feel and how they begin to think about us differently by us being honest with what we're feeling. And I feel that's always been something that many people have juggled with or struggled with, because we often pretend to hide our negative emotions or certain things we're going through for the approval of other people. But this also comes back to a bigger understanding, which I've no doubt we'll dive into at some point, that since we're born, we obviously every day we go through so many different experiences, big and small, depending on the way you look at it. But if you ask any person, the chances are they're more likely to be able to remember a lot more of the negative instances that happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years versus the happy memories. Now, don't get me wrong, they could search for them and find them, but it's normally the negative ones that stick out straight away. And the reason why is because we spend an entire life of being able to regulate and express our positive emotions, so therefore they've been regulated and expressed, whereas the negative emotions haven't been openly communicated to other people, so therefore they're going to be the more prominent parts of you that haven't been expressed or put out into the world. Mm-hmm. So therefore your subconscious, your conscious mind are going to be putting that in your face in the sense of, what about these over here?
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. And I think for some people, they have spent so much time being afraid of the negative experiences and the negative emotions. Even the people that have no idea of any positive emotions in their background because they've been so focused on the negative, and those negatives have been repeating. I think for them, they become afraid of going near it, because it seems too big, it'll swallow you up, it'll never end. It's, how do we help them start to see that, because I remember coming back to acceptance, people saying, as soon as you can accept that this is exactly the way it's unfolding, the way it's supposed to unfold for you. I'm just glad I wasn't close to the person saying it to me at the moment they said it to me, because it would have punched their lights out. So I don't know about you, but I think there is a delicacy in being able to help people have an understanding of both the positive and the negative, and then getting curious about, for me, it's about having an understanding of what perceptions we picked up in those moments and how those perceptions have continued to either create more negative experiences in our life or create more positive experiences in our life. And that there's never going to be all of one or the other, that there's always going to be a mixture of both. But the more we have that, like you said, the curiosity and the be able to understand what those perceptions were about, then we're not going to keep hitting our head against the same wall.
Yep.
So how then do we really help people understand that the more that you're able to get curious about these negative emotions or negative experiences and what little gems they might hold for you, that to me, that's always been the question. How do you help people understand that you can go back there and it can actually be a positive thing to go back there and explore it?
It's such a tricky thing to expect people to be able to do on their own, because I don't know if it's possible.
So I'm sitting here shaking my head, because if I could have done it on my own, you can bet your ass I would have, because I'm probably one of the most fiercely independent, let me figure it out on my own because people aren't safe anyway kind of people. But what I have discovered over the years is that my conscious mind goes, that's enough of that. Move on. You know, you go back and you can try and get close to it, but without someone holding that space, because usually that is really one of the bigger things, someone else to hold the space so that you can feel safe in it. Without that, my mind will go, okay, so that's enough of that. Let's move on. Or you've cried enough. Or, you know, how long are you going to do this for? And what's it really going to get you? And that's just my experience, that the conscious mind is eagerly trying to pull us out because it didn't feel safe back then. Certainly doesn't feel safe right now. Let's move on. And so my experience is that is why it's tricky, because how many people actually understand that process?
I think that's where, when it comes to a lot of material books and different resources out there, I feel a lot of them will naturally, no different to, for our experiences over many years, there were so many books, for an example, that did bring up so many new understandings and new awarenesses and educated us on so many things. But I feel the purpose of a lot of those sources of information is really to try to strike a chord of curiosity for you to continue your journey of exploration. Other people's journey can only encourage you to help you do your own. Whereas I still think we still turn to often too many people for them to give us the answer about ourselves, when really, as you said, that person's responsibility in that moment in time is simply to hold the space for you to feel safe enough to actually get the answer that's already in you, but the life you already chose and planned for yourself.
You know, and I think if I could have had that understanding at a younger age, it would have been phenomenal, because I truthfully believed for many years that there was something wrong with me. And so therefore, somebody else out there would have the answer. And so the seeking part of my journey has always been about trying to find the person who's going to have the answer for me. And that it was just a matter of a numbers game, that if I asked enough people, I would come across the person that has the answers. That is one of the understandings that I have, really wished I could have understood at an earlier age. That, and you do hear it, it's out there, but no one had the ability to explain it to me in a way that I could understand.
That it was practical.
Yes.
And actually able to digest it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we say that. So we say the power is in us, or the ability to understand it is in us. But when you're in the middle of a trigger, or when you're full of fear, or when you're, feel like you're hanging on for dear life, you're not thinking you have a lot of answers inside of you.
As we know, especially when starting out the journey of healing and understanding your emotions and your mind, that's step one of the entire process of just creating that sense of stability and communication from within. And that needs to be regulated really before you ever try to get hold of the answers that you will get to eventually. It's like you have to learn to walk before you run.
Yes. As we're talking, what was your journey in understanding that you have to walk before you run?
Throughout the many years of exposure to spirituality, all of the spiritual books were talking about the energy and your spirit, but very few of them, now looking back, actually talked about emotions or being able to accept the mind and understanding why the mind also needs to exist as a spiritual being in a physical body. A lot of the books, I feel unintentionally, were actually demonizing very human parts of you and telling you that if you want answers, don't go there, go within. But when you go within, you still have your emotions and your thoughts. And it actually becomes more of a battle than it does a simpler a process for answers. Only after a number of years of exploration that it became quite apparent that all of this new spiritual information that I had digested and made sense of was never going to stop my thoughts or get rid of my emotions. And that's what kind of did lead to a bit of a breakdown in the sense of actually allowing myself to feel all of my emotions and to process all of my thoughts. And then a lot of work, it became balanced in mind, body, emotions, and soul, because I had a good understanding of why they all need to exist within me as a human being.
Well, I would simply agree with that. I think there's a lot of demonizing, as I would call it, of the different parts of ourselves. And for my, in my journey, it was about, I wanted to understand the mind, mainly because my entire life as a child and early teens, I got told that I couldn't regulate my emotions and that, I should get it in check. Again, I approached it with, there's something wrong with me. I don't have the ability to regulate like everybody else does. And so that started that curiosity into looking into understanding the mind, because even though I was constantly expressing the emotion, I would have said back then that I understood the emotion because I lived it and breathed it constantly. I didn't understand why the thoughts did what they did. And yes, that teaching that they gave me, or I don't want to say they gave me, that teaching that I understood back then led me to want to control my mind as well as control my emotions. So to me, that's where I think it gets tricky when it comes to, if I bring it back to practical spirituality. To me, that's my first definition of practical spirituality, is really coming to an understanding of myself, my thoughts, of my mind, of my emotions, of my physical being. So for me, the energy part of it didn't come into it at all, because it was always about, how I wasn't coping in the world. And I don't think that's that different for a lot of people out there today. I think what I'm trying to say about all this, Gareth, is it wasn't until I was fumbling through in my 20s and early 30s, trying to grasp what this whole thing, my life, was about, that I started to, like you said, I'm reading a lot of those other spiritual books. Some of it I would agree with, some of it I wouldn't agree with. Sometimes it take me down a certain track and I get so far down that track and go, ugh, nope, this isn't working. This
not for me.
Not for me. So, Gareth, when we talk about the fact that we've already predetermined what we're going to experience in this particular lifetime, if I've already had the opportunity to decide I'm going to go through this experience, this experience, then why would I bother to come back down here and experience it again?
Your spirit comes here, it's signed up for these experiences, it's all knowing, but then there's a ginormous difference between your spirit being all knowing than actually being here to experience everything that the physical has to offer versus being an energy. So it's not only just about the logic of understanding what you're going through, it's about the feeling, the physical feeling, the emotional feeling, all these different aspects that energy or spirit can't experience unless they're in the physical to experience it as a whole.
I agree with that 100%.
It's different to spending your entire life reading up on Italy, knowing all the maps in Italy, all the famous places, people, etc. But yet you've never been able or never been allowed to step foot actually in the country to experience it firsthand. So you can imagine if you know everything about this place, then suddenly you have the opportunity to fly there and experience it firsthand. The emotions that would bring up in you is actually when you're able to come to life.
Yes.
And it's where those two worlds meet, or the many worlds meet, of mind, body, emotions, and soul. And that's the human experience itself. And we need to go through many different experiences that challenge us logically, emotionally, and physically to understand the spectrum of what we're actually capable of experiencing.
So basically what you're saying then is, yes, even though spirit has already set this in stone, we don't actually have the experience of it until we're here. And that is the adventure. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Exactly. And it wouldn't be much of an adventure of experience if you had that spiritual knowledge of everything that was going to unfold. There'd be no surprise and emotion. If anything, people would try to control every part of it. And us not being able to understand where it's going means we think we have control, but really we don't, because we all know how life likes to throw curveballs at us that can completely take us off guard.
Exactly. So then many people believe they have the ability to change what's happening to them or to choose different experiences.
Throughout this life, we're definitely always going to be guaranteed to have both negative and positive experiences in different amounts. And if we were actually able to regulate our emotions and question the experiences themselves, we'd be less concerned about which one we want more of, because both equal a level of growth that needs to exist in us.
So, and for me, can I just see if I've got that right? Because for me, the way I look at it is, as you come back to that place of balance that you're talking about, and then we're not choosing one more over the other, the only reason that I think I need to change my life is because I'm feeling not okay with where I'm at, or I'm feeling like there's something wrong with where I'm at. And so therefore I think, okay, this needs to change. But that could also bring us back to the understanding, or it's an opportunity to understand the experiences that we're having. And once we gain that wisdom and understanding, then we're naturally going to move in a different direction.
Because change is always inevitable for all of us in life anyway, as we both know. But as long as we're not trying to control what that change looks like, and if we're trying to control what that change looks like, it's because there's parts of ourselves, mentally, emotionally, or physically, that we won't explore, have fear to explore. And that can be for a number of factors. But that is where it's actually not necessarily the experiences that we went through that's the problem, or where life is taking us that's the problem. Is us not understanding why this is actually, why all these different experiences are a key part of life. And that's why it happens to 8 billion of us day in, day out. So it's not that the system of how it works is necessarily broken. It's just our understanding of it maybe needs to be explored a little bit more.
For me, in trying to understand this whole journey, as I, was growing up and went through the different avenues, exploring the different parts of spirituality and exploring what was going on for me, there was a real desperate need to make sense of why things happened the way they happened. For me, in my journey, what happened was I came across a book that I was reading that talked about this sort of thing. And it was the only thing that made sense, because I grew up in, as you know, in that atmosphere of, the religion and God this, God that, God, but I heard a lot of, well, why would God do this to us? And, why would God, if God loved us, why would he allow that little boy to be killed? And if God loved us, da, 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 da. And so that used to really, really bug me, because of the way that I was taught one thing and then they would question this and they wouldn't have the answer and I didn't have the answer.
Yeah.
So when I came across the book that talked about it all being laid out for us to have the experiences, that made a lot more sense to me than random events happening and us being punished.
To put it very practically and very simply, we often don't want to believe that to be true, as we talked about before, when we're not able to regulate the emotions that the experience brought up in us. And the moment we're able to regulate the emotions around a certain experience, we're able to understand why it needed to exist in our lives in the present and what it actually means for us moving forward. It creates a whole new level of purpose within us and freedom. And once you get to that place, you don't actually begin to question, even if a negative experience happens today or tomorrow, You still have your human experience of reacting to it and feeling the emotions that come along with it. But logically, you have the deeper capacity to be able to question it and get to the end result and why it happened.
And so is there any choice in that? Where does choice fit into it?
You can choose to explore it. You can choose not to. And if you choose not to, because you weren't meant to. And if you choose to, it's because you weren't meant to.
It's confusing as all hell. You do know that, right? I mean, I hear you. Like, that used to confuse the shit out of me when you would say that. If they do, it's because they're meant to. And if they don't, it's because they're not meant to. And I go, no, not acceptable answer. That's not
what would like the answer to be?
I don't know. I want to hear that, yes, choice does have something to do with it.
But again, like, it's very hard not to put it simply in the sense of it's very easy to overcomplicate it. Like, say when it comes to having positive experiences in this lifetime and how they naturally appear, it's not that we're suddenly choosing whether, or having a conversation whether we chose for it to happen or not, or is it a choice or whatever. Something when it comes back to negative experiences that we're like, I wouldn't have chose that. Whereas you don't go back to a positive experience and went, I wouldn't have chose that for that to happen. So we condition the understanding to suit what we can't emotionally process.
Okay, I agree with that. And so here's one thing that I want to say about what you just said, especially when it comes to simple and complicated.
Yeah.
Where I picked it up, I don't know, but I learned a long time ago that if it's simple, it's probably based in spiritual truth. If it's complicated, it's usually coming from mind, ego, someplace else. Because the mind likes to complicate things, not, where when truth is, and I think it's everybody's individual truth, but truth is simple. We might not like that it's so simple. And most of the time it's so simple, it goes right over our head.
Yep. But this is why a lot of these explanations and us just talking out these understandings are inevitably going to be triggering for a lot of people, simply because they haven't sat with the experience that this conversation is bringing up on them and the emotions surrounding it.
Mm-hmm.
If we were talking about happy memories and that you chose for that to happen, you'd be very, I did. I did choose that to happen, didn't I? It was really great, and I can't wait to choose many more to happen because we're filled with these emotions are great, and I can't wait to have more of them.
Mm-hmm.
But all emotions are great. It's just you haven't been allowed to have exposure to understand why the other side of the coin needs to exist, yin and yang. There's balance within it. But it doesn't mean that the information we've received or the lessons that we've been taught were balanced for us to understand our lives that are actually balanced. But it doesn't feel that way because we're not balanced within our emotions.
Mm-hmm. So that is where choice comes into it then. Because choice comes into it, we are taught to choose to own all the happy, beneficial parts of it and to disown the parts that aren't so healthy or that are negative connotations.
Where choice comes into it, what's really important to understand is it is your journey, and you can choose to do it in any which way you want. You can choose to control your thoughts, you can choose to control your emotions, you can choose to express, or you can choose to keep it in. And this is where it's that, and whatever unfolds from that is a part of your experience and a part of your journey anyway. And that's why we have at times, and we can all look back at our lives and go, wow, 10 years ago I felt really strongly on this, but now I don't 10 years later because we've evolved and changed. But there was a reason at that time why we weren't able to evolve away from that understanding, because reality is there's understandings and beliefs out there that are protecting us from something that we just didn't have the capacity at that time to process or to look at. Whatever decision you make is a part of what you've already signed up for, so you do have free will. I feel if you're fighting for free will, the idea of free will, you're also fighting for control over many areas of life that you already know you don't have control over, but you can't emotionally admit that to yourself yet. So again, to understand the free will part of it is to basically, whether free will exists or not, what's the fight to want to keep it?
Control.
Yeah.
It comes back to wanting to control.
wanting to control and feeling out of control. And we feel out of control because we're not able to regulate or process all the emotions that allow us to feel balanced and to understand the freedom. And when we feel free, we don't want control, we don't need control, because we trust life. And we trust life a lot more if we could process the emotions that from previous experiences that have already happened.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've been able to process and understand your past experiences, both positively and negatively, you don't care if free will exists or not, because you're free and at peace.
So what I'm hearing you say very loudly and clearly, that the importance is not in whether it's predestined or not, or whether there's free will or not, but in the processing of our emotions and our experiences.
Yes, because it's only through continuing to build a solid foundation with our emotions, the entire spectrum, and how they interact with one another, and applying a steady logic of understanding consciously and subconsciously to why emotion needs to exist. It's only then do we have the deep ability to understand the spiritual reasoning for all of it to come together and why we're here and the purpose behind it all.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to explore these topics more with us, please go to www.patreon.com/Practical Spirituality Podcast. Not only will that help us keep producing these shows, but you'll also get advance access to each new episode, the opportunity to ask questions directly of Gareth and I, input into what topics we will cover on the show, access to exclusive content not available anywhere else. See you over on Patreon.